So good afternoon. My name is Joel Steidel. I work for Atten Design Group. We're based in Denver, Colorado, and we're a strategy, design, and development company. Feel free to come by and talk to us. We're a friendly bunch, at least I would like to think we are. So I've got plenty to cover today. I'll be talking on page layouts in Drupal and some different ways you could approach that. First, I really want to define what I mean by a page layout in Drupal. Kind of define that as a mashup of node information, so like something at the field level, potentially a block. Blocks can come from many different places. The views module is a major place where we may get some blocks. Also, just a default Drupal block that may just be some text. But all of these together, I feel like, can come together and make up a complex layout in Drupal. So quickly, just in case, I'm going to try to stand here for the microphone. My wife often has to tell me to talk more quietly, so if I'm blasting everyone, just cover your ears and I'll know. All right, so quickly, in case you snuck into the room and you don't have much experience with Drupal, the default way of doing page layout in Drupal is through the blocks interface. So through blocks, you have a list of all the regions that are defined by your theme that you have enabled. Every theme can have really unlimited number of regions, and a region is just a place on the page to put a piece of content. In this case, through the blocks layout, that would be a views block or a Drupal block that you're creating here on the page. But if you've used Drupal for any amount of time, you quickly learn that this approach is very limiting. The complexity of different landing pages throughout your site quickly make this page a mess to use and maintain. And then if you're working in an environment where you want pretty much all your code to be in an exportable format, that's a little bit harder to do with the default Drupal blocks user interface. All right, so for my demo today, I put together this record label site. I figured it offered the type of complexity that is useful to discuss. So on this page, I have fields and view blocks intermingled all in one layout. What are some different ways that you all might approach a page like this? All right, I've got a display suite up here in the front. Context, all right, you guys are just really building up for my transition here. It's great. What are some other ways? Panels, all right. Yes. Custom tilt. Wow. All right. My four. I paid all these audience members because those are the four approaches we're really going to cover today as a different ways we could approach a layout like this. So I've been doing Drupal for about 6 years now. And I feel like my approach tends to shift a little bit on every project. You know, it's like, oh, I learned this great way to do it in Display Suite. This is working well. And then at some point, it's like, this is not working as well as I'd really hoped. I'm going to try something else. Oh, panels. That sounds cool. How's that work? So today, I really hope to give you a bit of information, some pros and cons about Display Suite context panels, and then an approach of doing this more at the template level. I don't get too deep into that approach, but hopefully when you leave, you will know exactly how you want to build your next project. So let's dive in. So Display Suite is gives you the ability to build complex layouts really at the entity level or the node level. Let's go take a look at what Display Suite really provides out of the box. So we are checking out a node right here, and you can see I clicked on Manage Display. And I'm clicking on the Display Suite view mode. That's one thing right out of the box that Display Suite provides are additional view modes over the default. So if you've come to this page before after just installing Drupal, you'll notice like just teaser and full content are really the two view modes that you get out of the box there. Once you enable a module like Display Suite, you can create as many of these view modes as you like. One thing I forgot to mention, feel free to interrupt along the way if you have a comment or question. That is just fine. The second piece Display Suite really provides are layouts. So if I scroll to the bottom here, I can see I now have access to various layouts. I'm using one called 3-column stacked. And of course, we have access to all these various layouts. If we had looked at this page before we had enabled Display Suite, we would see two sections, disabled and enabled. But now we have regions that are specific to our layout that we have enabled. So we can move our various pieces of content around. And when we look at it, let's see if I can zoom out a little bit here. Yeah. The layout I showed you will be fairly boring each time because it's going to look exactly the same with each of these approaches. But the main thing I wanted to demonstrate is you can take 4 different approaches to build something and get the same or a very similar result. All right, so pros and cons of Display Suite. I like it because you can enable the module and quickly have access to multi-column layouts. There's nothing fancy that you have to do there. It's mostly exportable through a module-like features if you're concerned about the exportability of your code. Again, the additional view modes. Display Suite was the first time I was introduced to additional view modes. If all you're interested in are using additional view modes at this point, you may want to consider a module like Entity View Modes or just defining your own view modes through your own custom module. I wouldn't install Display Suite just for having access to additional view modes. Custom fields are available. So in the case of displaying a block mixed in with your fields, you have to add a Display Suite custom field to display that block. That could be a little bit tedious because for every block you're wanting to display, you're creating a new custom field for that block to display in. And it uses all the same CTools layouts that are available to panels. So if you have panels module enabled, in addition to Display Suite, you have access to all those layouts available through panels as well. So if you're familiar with creating CTools layouts, you'll be right at home and be able to create those for Display Suite as well, and they can be used interchangeably. Cons, if you've used Display Suite, you click a ton through the UI. So if you have a fairly complicated page, you spend the majority of your day just clicking things. And maybe that's okay with you. It's very focused at the entity and field level. So Display Suite doesn't really lend itself well for various ad hoc landing pages that you're building. Display Suite really needs to be tied to something like a node for it to have much sense. Whereas, we'll get there in a bit, a module like Panels allows you to create those ad hoc layouts for really anything you want. And then I have noticed that there can be some weirdness with Display Suite and views that are utilizing contextual filters and things not working exactly as they should. Yes?
This is probably a really dumb question, but given that Display Suite is very focused at the entity field level, how did you make it do your sample demo page with all that content coming in from different places? That's not just one node.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, let's check that out real quick. So if we go check out our Display Suite menu here. This is the only custom thing that I've really done is if we go look at our layout here, it's looking nice and jumbled. Thanks Chrome for zooming all my windows not independently. I have a view of tour dates over here in the left-hand column. I have a discography, and I have some news. Those are 3 different views and view blocks at that point. Through Display Suite, I've added a block field. And at that point, I have access. You can say what you want that to be available to. So I want this to be available for all my nodes. It's a bit labor intensive, but you can, any view block you define, you can come in and add as a custom Display Suite field. And then you can add that right alongside of your node fields at that point. Yes?
So aren't you in effect doing a landing page if you can add using blocks to a node? You can basically hide the titles in Display Suite also. You can hide the body. So you basically have a blank node at that point, and you just can do anything with it at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the intended purpose, but say you had like a basic page content type, for example, you could very well do that. But the weirdness I think would come in is you would end up having to create like a separate view mode potentially for each instance of the landing page you want to use, and that there are probably better approaches for doing something like that. Yes?
Kind of curious if those block fields that you created, when those are actually rendered for output, is the markup similar to what a regular block looks like, or is it a field?
Yeah, that's a great question. So his question is, when the custom fields that I'm adding through Display Suite to render out like a view block, is that markup the same as that getting added to like a region through the default block UI? And yeah, it retains basically the same like terrible views markup with like 4 nesting divs. So yes, and probably an extra one for a field. All right. So let's keep rolling along here. One thing I'll mention before we move on from Display Suite, I talked about the regions that come with your theme when I was describing the default blocks UI approach of adding a block to those defined regions. In a module like Display Suite or Panels, how it works is it injects that layout, and a layout, in my opinion, it has its own regions defined, if that makes sense. It's the regions are completely separate than the ones defined in your theme, but you could have a multi-column layout that has like a sidebar, for example, and a main content, but that is completely separate than the main content from your theme's regions. So know with all these approaches like display suite and panels, those various layouts get loaded in your theme's main page content region, if that makes sense. So keep that in mind. I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into panels. So next up, someone mentioned context. Another way of doing these complex layouts, I would say context is really the progression of the default blocks UI. It feels very similar if that's a comfortable approach for you. And it offers a little bit more maintainability than that default blocks UI. So let's jump in and take a look. So we'll back up and check out the main context page. So you could have tons of different contexts here. You could have one for every content type on your site. So you could have a different context that is active for each of your content types, if that makes sense. So in the case, I have one that I named artist nodes. For my demo, I had I have a weird condition set up, but a more one that you may use on a more regular basis would be just selecting node type and saying, all right, for all artist nodes, I want this particular context to be active. So anytime you're visiting an artist page, it will utilize whatever context you have set up here. And then there are reactions to that context. And this is what should feel very much at home for you if you've used the Drupal blocks UI before. You have a list of all your regions themes, or all the regions defined by your themes here. And then on the right, you have all the blocks that are available to you. So it's a bit of a weird UI, in my opinion. But you can see here, any of these blocks can then be added to your theme's region. And those will only be active or appear if it meets the criteria of an artist node or whatever you've defined. And then, so I built this out. Again, we can see my awesome skills here. Building this again, the same layout using context. The big difference here is I'm relying on my themes regions over any kind of layout that a module is providing for me, just because that's how context works. It utilizes your regions. So some pros and cons of this approach. I think it's flexible. It's easy to create many contexts that work together. And what that means, I could easily have a site-wide context that would maybe say on every single page of the site, I would like a menu to appear. Because that's a very common thing we want, right? Like in the header, we want a menu to appear on every page. In addition to that, on our artist page, we want this specified set of content to appear. And so I do like the fact that you can have many contexts that work together in that regard. Context is a lightweight module. It's not loading up a ton of extra stuff in order for you to use it. It keeps your site nice and fast. And then again, it's exportable with something like features or ctools. Cons of the context module, in my opinion, are the UI is challenging for non-nerds to really understand. I've had the pleasure of teaching a few clients context module, and I feel like it's just not fun to explain. It's hard to place node fields without a module like field as a block. So going back to, this is sort of opposite of our problem with the module like display suite, where our challenge there was like, how do we get our blocks intermingled with our fields? Well, in context, we have the opposite problem. How do we display our fields in the context of blocks? So there's this crazy module that I came across. I'm not necessarily condoning this, but I wanted to see if it was possible for my demo. So let's go check it out. So if I go back over and go to Manage Display, and I'm using, basically I utilize view modes for my different approaches for the demo. You can see there's this new column here called Display is Block. And I have that checked off for every field. At that point, once it's checked off, we can go check out context. And some of you may have noticed this when we were here earlier, but we can check out our blocks. And so now we can see things like band members field from node artist and from the context view mode. So it's basically giving us access now in context to have all our fields available as a block. I imagine there's some probably gross code going on in the background to make this available. Probably not a really efficient way to load data. But if you have a smaller site and you need something like this available, check it out. All right, next up, another vote somewhere back here for the panels module. So again, these are all user interface approaches. You can click through and configure directly through the UI. So it's an approach for adding blocks and other elements to a page matching some sort of specified criteria. So not so different than context. Context I didn't mention, but you can create some of those like ad hoc landing pages more easily with that module because you can define something to be active at a particular path and then just add various content to that. I just poked a hole in that approach though. You would have to define that path somehow. So you would either need to create a node at that path or define something in a module with like hook menu. So you still, there's still, even with context module, you still need some basis for that path to be added to Drupal. Panels is the one approach here. Panels and code that works around that completely. You can create a page at any path that you want and create that very specific landing page if you so choose to. That's not tied to a node or any other entity-based content. All right, so let's go check out the panels approach here. You'll see the first thing that I really need to do is I need to enable my layout. I realized in building this demo that panels was trumping all the other approaches. By the way, I'm not condoning having context display suite and panels installed on your site. You'll drive someone insane if you do that. So you can see this is one of the, by default, if you install panels and page manager, they're kind of like go hand in hand together. One of the default paths you get is node / this %node, and all that's like a placeholder. More if you're familiar with tokens in Drupal or something like that. Node / %node is basically saying add a node path, so node / NID of the ID of your piece of content. This particular panel would then become active. If I edit that, I created a new variant. And variants are really useful to becoming more specific. So here I'm saying I want this particular variant to only be active. It's called a selection rule. I only want it to be active for my artist node in this case. And then for this variant also, I can specify a layout. So these, again, are CTools layouts. So if you're familiar, they're fairly straightforward to create. It's not so different than defining new regions for your theme. So if you have a little bit of familiarity with PHP, it's not too hard to create extra layouts to use for panels. And then once you've defined your layout, then you can add content. So panels is really the only approach that we've discussed so far where I can tap into my nodes fields and all those different types of blocks without any custom modules. It just works out of the box with panels, which is kind of nice. So for example, if I click on add content, I can click on node. We have access to all our node fields here. If I click on miscellaneous, what a great name. I have access to my various views at that point. And let's go check out our artist page one more time, because it's going to look so different. So let's check out some pros and cons here. So pros, one thing I really do like is it's very exportable. So a lot of projects I've had to work on have been with larger teams, and the requirement is that everything's in code. And so if you're using module-like features, you have great compatibility with panels. I like that I can display pretty much anything with the module. I mentioned it does, it handles fields and views out of the box. And then you have unlimited flexibility with complex layouts. I mentioned that creating those new layouts is fairly straightforward. So say I had a landing page that had 4 columns, and then underneath that I needed something that was like full width, and then under that I had 2 columns. You can really get pretty creative with your panels layout, and it can handle it. Cons, I feel like it's hard to reuse elements across many panels. So one of the pros of context I mentioned was the ability to have multiple contexts active at the same time. You don't really have that same approach with a panel. So what you end up having to do is create potentially many new variants if you need something to be slightly different somewhere else. Cons, next con, I feel like it's sluggish. I've never gotten an idea that when I enable panels that my site is suddenly faster. It usually has like the opposite effect. Again, it adds more markup to the page. And it also introduces another caching layer that you have to be concerned about. So it can make debugging potentially more challenging. The UI is a little cumbersome and confusing, as you probably saw me clicking through there. It's a little bit like hide and seek, like trying to find different things. I think once you get it nailed down, it's fine, but definitely a learning curve to just being able to use the module itself. And then, new layouts can be slow to create. If I have time and there's interest at the end of this, I can talk a little bit more. If any of you have used the console in Drupal 8, you may know some of it basically asks you a few questions for say you want to create a new module. It'll ask you what's the module name? what do you want to, just a few general questions, and then it writes that module code for you, the initial, so you have a starting place. You don't have to create 2 files, etc. One of our front-end developers at Atten created so that's built on something called Yeoman generator. We actually built one of these for C tools, so it asks you some different questions about how many columns you want your layout to have, et cetera, and it basically scaffolds or writes your initial layout for you. So we can come back to that if there's interest, or feel free to grab me afterwards and we can look at that more closely. All right, and then code. Sometimes it feels good to write your own HTML in a template and not click stuff. So I think pros of this approach, anymore these days, this tends to be my favorite approach. If the project requirements don't need the client editing some sort of complex layout, I really enjoy the code approach. It's efficient, very little extra code has to run. So a module like Display Suite or Panels is layering on top of Drupal, the Drupal APIs to do different things. So basically, it's like a layer to run a particular page. And if you can just, basically bypass all those layers and access that directly through your own code, it is definitely faster. So it's fast to create and modify layouts. There's no cumbersome UI. So if you're really familiar with HTML, sometimes it can be more enjoyable just to jump in and do this directly in a template. There's nothing to export. Everything's saved in code. And the code is generally pretty simple to understand. So cons, hard to know where the code is that controls the layout. An advantage with Display Suite and Panels, you can usually inspect and see some different divs that Panels or Display Suite have added. So it's a little bit easier to know, all right, Panels is providing this. I at least know where to go look for this. If you're doing all that through custom code, it can be a little harder to determine where that's coming from. The end user can't easily change stuff. I see that as sort of a pro and con at the same time. There's page layouts that have a certain level of complexity that it's really hard to make it so you can just allow someone to completely change the content and the page maintain the look that you were hoping for. So sometimes taking away that control is actually not so bad. You do need to know some PHP, so I think some people would see that as a con. And then adding elements like blocks requires you to load that block through code. There's also a module called ViewField that adds your views as directly to the content array, and you can access that in your nodes input at that point. So you can check that out. All right, so the main pieces that I want to cover with code, the first being hook page build. And so you would do any of these through a custom module, and sometimes in the theme level layer. I should have backed up and said, so far everything we've talked about is for Drupal 7. There's going to be lots of but don't worry, I've got some Drupal 8 stuff here at the end that will be useful for you. So all this would go, at least this particular function would go in a custom module that you would create. And what I love about this is the simplicity. So $page is the render array for everything that's getting added to your page's regions. Header is just a defined region in your theme. So we're saying, and then donate is just a name that we've given this particular piece of content we're adding. It could be named Joel or whatever you want to call it. And then the array is quite simple. We're giving it a weight, and that's basically saying the order that you want it to appear in. And then we're saying what markup do we want to appear. So I use this approach a lot for adding global elements to my sites. So say I have a copyright that I want to be in the footer of every page. This could be a really simple way to add that. And to do it in a cleaner way, because usually our copyright, we may want the date to not be hard-coded. So doing it here makes more sense because we can add that logic in and keep the logic out of our template directly. That makes sense. So really, a module-like context or the default block UI is really utilizing, this is what it's doing behind the scenes, more or less. All it's doing is adding new elements into that page array. Great, the next piece that I end up using a lot is hook preprocessed node. Again, this particular hook can get implemented at the theme level or in a module. And I think I used to use this incorrectly a lot. I would add new things to the content array through preprocessed node. You can do that. I think the preferred way would be to add that through hook node view alter, at least in Drupal 7, and then only modify through hook preprocessed node. There's probably people that feel differently about that, but that's kind of been my approach as of late. So in this particular case, I had enabled a module called minimal share, which adds sharing buttons to your node. And in this case, this module added the share icons to every single view mode, which was super annoying. And rather than, I had quite a few content types enabled, and rather than going in and, dragging these share icons out of each view mode and clicking save, I decided I would just handle this through a preprocessed function. So all I'm saying here is for all other, so vars type is the content type, and article is my content type machine name in this case. Basically, I was saying here, for all other content types other than article, just get rid of those minimal share icons. So I'm just unsetting that from that content array. So it can be quite handy to do things efficiently that way. And then another thing, and I want to mention real quickly that the $ content is what we would access in one of our node templates, for example, where we're rendering out our fields. So you've potentially seen $ content and then the brackets and a particular field name. That's the most common way that you may see that in your node template. And so when I'm saying modifying or adding to $ content, we're basically adding to that same array that our fields are getting added to at the node level. So here in a hook node view alter, here's a case where I wanted to add a block that was available to basically any content type. And so this is really the code approach for doing this. I'm loading the blocking code. I'm doing that through a module called stools. Please don't read that wrongly as stools. Super gross if you do that. And at this case, I'm basically just loading that blocking code and then making that block available in my node template at this point. And this is a really, really great way to be able to add things and then render in your template. All right, so how about Drupal 8? Some of you may be happy that I saw an alpha version for panels and display suite already. Looking through the issue queue for context, it looks like there are not really plans yet for context in D8. In that same issue queue, though, it sounds like there has been some functionality built around the default blocks UI in Drupal 8. Someone has built like an extra layer on top of that that works in similar fashion to context. So if you're a really big fan of that, maybe you could check out that issue queue and read about that. Code, yes. I had a little bit more information here, but it seems like the approaches keep changing a little bit for Drupal 8 and the proposed way to do it. Definitely one thing that I will mention is I think we should all get more comfortable with doing things at the node template level. So in Drupal 8, that will look like a twig template, and more logic is actually being encouraged directly in templates in Drupal 8. And Twig definitely gives the ability to do that. So I'm excited. I've been working with that a little bit over the past couple months. And I'm definitely excited about the potential of layouts in Drupal 8. All right, any questions? So the question was, how is Display Suite in terms of performance? You know, it would get cached right along with the page that's being loaded. I think I've definitely used it on some pretty large sites, and I've never had enormous concerns around the performance hit that using Display Suite takes. I think in a case where you may be adding, like in my example, if you're adding lots of views blocks to the page, that would be more of a performance concern than actually using Display Suite itself. Yes?
So how long would it have taken you to create that same code using custom code for those same layouts versus using
Yeah, that's a great question, and potentially something I should add to this. So the question was, how long would it have taken me to do the same layout with just code? And really what I would have done, if we want to hop back real quickly to, I probably would have done that simply by creating a node template. So I would have had an artist node template, and I would have simply created the 3 views that I had on the page. I would have repeated this chunk of code I have shown here 3 times, and then rendered that out directly in my template. So it actually would have been really simple to create, and no clicking through the UI, which would have made me happy. Yes.
Yeah, I've inherited a site, and I'm trying to add like a new block to the secondary area on various content types, and as a symptom that some of those done by Display Suite, some by code. Like sometimes it will fit in very well, and sometimes it will just break the page. Is there a good way to tell how a particular page was put together?
So the question is really like, how can you tell what approach was used for a particular page? And you know, I haven't used, there's a module called Devel and Devel Themer, I believe, that gives you some of that information about kind of from a theme perspective of how a page is put together. Do you have a good answer for this?
There's that theme debug that started in 7.34.
Yeah, there is a so some of the theme debug functions that were added to D8 were actually backported in Drupal 7 as of 7.34. So you can look at the theme debug function, and that may tell you some.
Actually, it's just a comp setting. I think 7.4 actually documents 7.41. One of the later two.
Hopefully that answers your question. And
Sorry, that's 7.34 in core, version core.
Yeah, if you go to 7.4, then it's actually documented in your settings at page 3.
the one thing to probably be aware of if you're using something like Display Suite, sometimes it likes to kind of trump all those lovely core debugging tools. So something to be aware of, probably.
I was going to say you can look at the markup, and especially with panels, it leaves fingerprints in the markup. You know, classes.
Absolutely, yeah. Just simply by inspecting elements and looking at the classes is a great way to tell as well. Panels in particular, like you're saying, will have all that information available. Yeah, I believe I had a question back here.
I was just going to say the same thing about the markup.
Cool. Yes.
You didn't comment on monopoly in this scheme. Can you just say that controls take out a survey for
Yeah, I think if I hear correctly, I didn't cover Panoply, and that's really I don't have any experience with it. I think that's one thing that you know, you can use Drupal for a long time and still not touch all the vast ways of accomplishing something in particular.
I looked at the Monopoly. There is sort of a distro that uses panels, but you sort of end up getting locked into what it provides as opposed to sort of getting all the whole powers of panels. So I would suggest it more as a learning tool than a thing to use.
Cool. Yeah. So it sounds like maybe if you've never used panels before, Panoply may be a good learning tool. Yes.
So of course you didn't, say which one is the best, except I guess you did say that your new preference is the last way, but and people asked about time and stuff. I mean, is it mostly just personal preference? I mean, there's pros and cons to each. It doesn't sound like any of them is the answer. And if you have a favorite and you use it and you like it and it works for you, that's okay.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think being open to the requirements of the project, like sometimes I walk into a project and the client team really wants to use something like panels, and being open to that and willing to work with that approach, I think is a good solution. But yeah, I would say for the most part, they each have their own strengths in a way. And what I wanted to show from my demo is you can really accomplish the same thing any manner of ways. And I think that really shows the power of Drupal. See, I probably have time for like one more question. All right, I think we're good. Thank you for coming.